1800s, chimney sweeps were often children who disappeared into the soot. History says they died of accidents. But at Wyvern Terrace, they didn't just die, they stayed. And now one of them has finally found a way out.
When I was a teenager, we moved into a Victorian-era terraced house in a small town in the United Kingdom. Houses in the UK can be centuries old, obviously, and even a Victorian-era house has seen its share of death and tragedy. So we moved into 18 Wyvern Terrace, town redacted as want to remain anonymous, and you could tell that the previous occupants had lived there for many years. This was the 1980s, but the most recent decor looked to be from the early 70s at that, and most of it much older. It had also been owned by an extremely old couple. They weren't always extremely old, I assume, but they were by the time we bought the house. Now anyways, the house had a pretty eerie, old kind of feeling. If you've ever lived in an old house along these lines, you'll know what I mean. There were various oddities, like how in the back guest bedroom there were what appeared to be knife gouges, only 8 feet up on the ceiling. The floors downstairs were all wooden parquet floors, with another layer of wooden floors underneath them that we discovered. And there was also a fireplace. It was all bricked up and then plastered up, and I remember me and my siblings being disappointed about this because it was pretty sad to have an ornate-looking fireplace, but it's sealed up so you can't use it. Now when I asked Dad about it, he just said that he had no idea and that it was probably just that the chimney stacks in the terraced houses had fallen into disrepair. We weren't the only house in the street who had a sealed up fireplace either. Now fast forward 6 months, I made a couple of friends in the neighborhood. Deano and Danielle were 2 of my best pals, and my younger brother buddied around with this kid named Tom. Now we'd all hang out at the nearby park and just do what 6 to 9-year-old kids did back in the 1980s. Now one day, Danielle, or Danny, asked me if I knew the history of my house. I told her what I did know, and she said no, she didn't mean that. There was a legend about the house from back in Victorian times, and all the neighborhood kids knew about it. And it was time for me to know too. Danny wasn't usually one for pranks or kidding around, so we listened raptly as she told us about how this little chimney sweep kid had gotten stuck in the flue back in the late 1800s. And somehow nobody had realized that he was up there for a few days. Don't ask me how this was possible. Eventually, while the family was sitting in the living room, reading and listening to the gramophone or whatever Victorians did, there was a sudden thump from the fireplace and a cloud of ash. As you guessed, the body of the urchin chimney sweep had somehow gotten dislodged from the flue and fallen down. He was emaciated, broken, and mutilated. But, as the story goes, he wasn't dead. He reached up out of the fireplace and croaked a single sentence towards the family. "I fell." And then the boy dropped dead. Now, me and my brother Chris went home after that, and we accused Danny in a good-naturedly way of trying to spook us, but she swore that she wasn't and just told us to be careful of the boy who fell. Now, a few nights later, I had a dream about being trapped in the chimney. I couldn't move, I was upside down somehow, and I also possessed the full knowledge that my employers, a local rag and bone organization with a side hustle in chimney sweeping, had sent me up there knowing full well that I'd get stuck and then claimed that I'd abandon the job. I didn't know why they'd done this, but that's the information I had. I'm not saying this is some kind of premonition. I've been doing a lot of reading up on chimney sweeps and orphans and urchins since Danny had told us the story of the boy who fell, so maybe it got lodged into my mind. But I'm also not willing to rule out the fact that the boy somehow reached out to me, not after what happened next. Now for the next few nights, whenever I was watching TV with my family in the living room, I kept glancing at the plastered over fireplace. Now the very sight of it freaked me out. And on top of that, we've been hit by a storm that was said to last a few days, so all kinds of ghostly whistling and howling was coming from behind the boarded up chimney, and I hated it. But it also confused me a bit. Danny had warned me to be careful, but what was I supposed to expect? The chimney was plastered up. At worst, and even this seems pretty terrifying, I might hear the thump of an unseen body, right? I managed to convince myself that if this did happen, I could just live with it. In fact, maybe he'd sense my empathy towards him and, I don't know, his spirit might be at peace or something. It was a Friday night. I was on my own because my parents were out to see my brother's school nativity play or some crap, and no way was I going to that, obviously. So Danny and Deanna came over and we played Mega Drive, or as you Americans like to call it, Genesis, for a while until they both had to go home. Deanna left and Danny was just standing on the doorstep saying goodbye. Now looking back, I think she had a bit of a crush on me because she is always finding excuses to stick around when it was just me and her. But I was oblivious to that. What I wasn't oblivious to, though, was asking her about the boy who fell. I explained my confusion and asked what's the worst he could do if his ghost fell down the chimney while it was plastered up. And I'll never forget Danny's words. No, the boy who fell doesn't just fall down the chimney. He can fall from anywhere. No, I thought about the high-ceilinged Victorian house. I thought about the attic trapdoor. I thought about the other flue in the kitchen, which had also been sealed up, but higher up. I thanked Danny for explaining and closed the front door. I turned, walked over the mat well of the small entry porch that led between the front door and the inner door. The small, high-ceilinged entry porch whose ceiling was out of sight once you stepped out of the porch and due to the way the wall was built. I didn't even give this layout any thought as I clicked the inner door closed and took a few steps into the empty, darkened house. And then from behind me, I heard the sound of something falling in the porch area. Something about the size and weight of a small urchin boy. And then I heard the voice. A croaky, raspy, centuries-old plea for help from a young boy who died hopeless, forgotten, and unloved. I fell. And I turned, slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. If he'd fallen from the ceiling of the porch, then he'd be on the ground, out of sight behind the inner door. The inner door had a glass window as the top half of the door, so I was able to creep closer and peer in, somehow brave enough to peer over in case the boy was lying on the ground. In my dumbass mind, I thought that maybe I could assist him even though he was long dead. No, I looked through the window and down the mat well, and I saw nothing. Obviously, there was nothing there. I let out one of the biggest, most relieved breaths, turned around and headed back into the house. And then I heard it again. I fell. And from where the voice was coming from, it wasn't the porch. And then it dawned on me. It was coming from above me. Slowly, terrified, I looked up. And there, on the ceiling, crouched spider-like, broken and emaciated, was the boy who fell. He was looking down at me with a broken neck, grinning through dirty yellow teeth. I fell, he said. Then the boy let go of the ceiling and fell straight downwards towards me. And the next thing I remember, I'm waking up in my bed. My parents were home because I could hear them going to bed themselves. And I did my best to convince myself that I'd gone to bed after Danny had left and the rest had been some nightmare. I got myself worked up. Obviously, the boy who fell didn't exist. And I even managed to convince myself of this until next year. The year when Chris went missing. It was chaos around the house for weeks, and maybe that's why it took us all so long to notice the smell gradually building up in the living room. It became unbearable, and my parents' relationship was already so fraught, but Mom forced Dad to hire workers to smash their way into the chimney stack and dig out the dead bird or cat of whatever was causing the smell. They barely finished smashing the plaster when there was a loud thump and a cloud of dust. I don't know why I've been present, but I think a part of me was expecting this. The worker had been using the sledgehammer, screamed in terror, and then ran from the room. I edged closer. My brother Chris lay broken and emaciated in the bricked-off fireplace. There was never an official explanation as to how the hell he got up there. His friend Tom got the blame. Tom lived next door, and he admitted that they'd been climbing on the roof out of the skylight. And the official explanation is that Chris went out there on his own somehow and decided to climb down the decommissioned chimney. Nobody talked about the fact that there was very little chance Chris could have fit down that tube. Nobody mentioned the rumor of the boy who fell. And I most certainly did not tell anyone about my encounter with the boy that night in my dreams. All I can think is I somehow placated the boy who fell by acknowledging him, and maybe my brother Chris simply did not. All I know now is that that house is now home to 2 boys who fell, and something tells me that things won't ever end there.